Welcome to this special edition of The Deep Dive. We're trying something a bit different, calling it a Tybootha podcast.
Right. The idea is we dedicate the whole time to really exploring just one book.
Exactly. And today, that book is Rupert Sheldrake's The Science Delusion. It's a work that, well, they definitely ask some big questions about science and how we understand things.
Absolutely. And Sheldrake himself, it's worth knowing a bit about him before we dive in. He's not some outsider,
Not at all.
He's got a solid science background, studied biochemistry at Cambridge, then a fellowship at Harvard, looking into the history and philosophy of science.
Right, so even early on, he was interested in the bigger picture, not just the lab bench.
Definitely. Then back to Cambridge for a PhD on plant development.
And he made some real contributions there, didn't he? Something about dying cells and auxin.
Yeah, that's right. He figured out how dying cells release auxin, the hormone, and how that actually spurs more growth. It's a kind of feedback loop. And he did significant work on how auxin actually moves through plants, the sort of molecular details. He was a research fellow at Clare College, even a Royal Society research fellow.
So, proper scientific credentials, does that background, you think, make his questioning of scientific dogma carry a bit more, well, weight?
I think it has to, doesn't it? He's coming from inside the system he's examining. It's not critique from the sidelines.
Yeah, it makes you sit up and listen a bit more, perhaps.
It prompts you to think, okay, why is someone with this background asking these questions?
Which leads us right into the book's main idea, the Science Delusion. He basically lays out 10 core beliefs or dogmas of modern science.
And he asks us to really look at them, question them, consider if there are other ways to think. It's not about rejecting science, but maybe broadening it.
Yeah, shaking things up a bit. And that's what we're aiming for with this Tybootha podcast format, really getting into the details.
Chapter by chapter, digging into the arguments.
So today we're starting with the prologue, which is called Science, Religion, and Power. And then we'll tackle chapter 1, Is Nature Mechanical?
Okay.
So the prologue. Why start there? Science, religion, power. What's the connection he's making?
Well, he kicks off by pointing out the huge dominance science has had since the late 19th century. I mean, look at technology, medicine. It's changed everything.
Undeniably. And it has this immense intellectual prestige, too, right? Offering explanations for everything from atoms to the whole universe.
It's a powerful story. But he also points to the historical link between science and power. Francis Bacon's old line, knowledge is power.
And how that's played out with funding often going towards applied science, technology, things with obvious uses.
Right. Which raises a question, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Has that focus maybe sometimes pushed more like fundamental just for the sake of knowing research to the side?
It's a fair point. There's always that tension.
And he mentions George Sarton back in the 50s, comparing the authority of science to the old Catholic Church before the Reformation.
Wow, that's quite a comparison.
Yeah, this idea of experts deciding the truth, and the public doesn't get much say. The sort of priesthood of knowledge.
Which links back to Bacon again, his idea of a scientific priesthood. Sheldrake suggests that's kind of happened globally.
But Bacon thought sound reason and true religion would guide it all. Looking back, maybe that was a bit optimistic.
Given some of the results, yeah, perhaps a little.
And the prologue touches on this recurring theme in science, this fantasy of omniscience.
Ah, Laplace's idea. The mind that could know the position of every particle and predict everything.
Exactly that. This drive for complete prediction. Huxley even extended it to evolution, suggesting you could predict, like, British wildlife from the Big Bang if you were smart enough.
That's incredibly deterministic. A clockwork universe, basically.
Pretty much. But then, boom, 1927. Quantum physics.
Heisenberg's uncertainty principle.
Right. Suddenly it's not clockwork anymore. It's probabilistic.
Yeah.
Chance is baked into the fundamentals. That was a huge shift.
Massive. So Sheldrake acknowledges science's successes, obviously, but argues it carries ideological baggage.
Yeah, from its European history. It wasn't born in a vacuum. And he talks about materialism as the kind of the unspoken rules of the game for scientists.
Like you just accept it to do the work, mostly.
Yeah, at least during working hours. He says few challenge it openly until, they retire or get a Nobel Prize.
Interesting point. Does it create a kind of groupthink, maybe? A reluctance to question the basics?
It could. And he also mentions the vocal atheist scientists, the evangelists of science, like Dawkins, Harris.
Who see it as a battle against superstition, against religion.
Yeah, presenting science as the only real path to truth. But Sheldrake points out that mechanistic science itself arose in the 17th century, partly because of religious wars.
Ah, as a way to find certainty beyond theological disputes.
Exactly. Mathematical physics seemed to offer these eternal objective truths. The pioneers thought they were finding God's blueprint, almost gaining a kind of divine mathematical insight themselves.
So there's a whole complex history behind these ideas we often take for granted.
Definitely. Which sets us up nicely for Chapter 1.
Right. Is nature mechanical? This gets right to the heart of that dominant metaphor.
And straight away, he reminds us that wasn't always the view. Think Thomas Aquinas. He saw natural things having souls, appointed by God, very different from a machine.
A much more alive view of the world.
Yeah. Even Copernicus, with his sun-centered model, Sheldrake notes, there were mystical reasons too. He felt the sun belonged in the middle. It was more dignified.
So not purely cold calculation driving these early shifts.
No. It shows how science, philosophy, even spirituality were kind of intertwined back then.
He uses that billiard ball analogy too. Physics describes the collisions.
But not the rules of snooker or why the players are playing.
Right. It shows the limits of just looking at the physical interactions.
Exactly. Then we get to the main player, René Descartes.
The father of mechanistic philosophy, really. That vision he had in 1619.
Leading him to see the universe as this giant mathematical system. That was revolutionary. It set the course for so much.
Understanding through maths and physical laws. And he didn't stop at the universe, did he? He applied it to life.
That was a really controversial bit. Animals, even human bodies, just complex clockwork. He argued you couldn't tell a sophisticated machine animal from a real one if it reasoned.
Which is incredibly reductionist. Everything just parts moving according to physical laws.
And Sheldrake points out, while the mechanical universe idea caught on, the mechanical life idea faced more pushback.
Especially in England, apparently, because it seemed to excuse cruelty to animals.
Exactly. If they're just machines, well, it raises ethical flags, even back then.
Interesting. And this era also saw mechanistic theology.
Yeah, William Paley's watchmaker analogy is the classic example. Look how complex nature is, like a watch. It must have a designer god.
So even theology was trying to work with the machine metaphor.
It was the dominant way of thinking. Sheldrake mentions this split emerging public science being rational and mechanistic, but maybe a private, more romantic view persisting.
And he suggests that split is getting harder to sustain now with things like Gaia theory, seeing the Earth as interconnected.
Yeah, that more holistic view challenges the purely reductionist machine idea. Then you had early evolutionary thinkers, Lamarck, Erasmus Darwin.
Before Charles Darwin.
Right. And their ideas about life-changing, improving itself didn't really fit the machine model either. Machines don't just decide to get better.
They introduced a kind of inherent creativity almost.
Exactly. Which paved the way for Darwin and Wallace's natural selection in 1858. Their goal was to explain evolution without purpose or design.
Just blind variation and selection. The subtitle of Origin of Species says it all, right? Preservation of favored races. Very mechanistic sounding.
It offered a powerful, non-vitalistic explanation.
But, Sheldrake asks, are organisms really like machines?
What's the key difference he points to? Growth, self-repair, reproduction. Machines don't do that on their own. A car doesn't grow or have baby cars.
Good point. If you just call life a machine, you're kind of glossing over these fundamental things.
Which brings in vitalism. This was the counter-argument for centuries, that life has some extra spark, some organizing principle beyond just chemistry and physics.
Like Liebig saying chemists could analyze an eye, but they couldn't make one.
Precisely. There's something more than just the sum of the parts. Sheldrake's analogy is brilliant here, grinding up a computer.
You get silicon, metal, plastic.
But you'll never understand the software, the information, the purpose by analyzing the dust.
It really hits home the limitation of pure reductionism for complex systems, especially living ones.
It's about organization, information, not just matter. He then talks about a modern twist, what he calls molecular vitalism.
How does that work?
He points to Richard Dawkins' The Selfish Gene. Genes are treated almost like they have purpose, agency.
The idea that we are just survival machines built by our genes to replicate themselves.
Exactly. It's like vitalism, but located in the DNA molecule. Genes are selfish, ruthless, building us lumbering robots to serve their ends.
That language is very striking, isn't it? Almost giving intentions to molecules.
It is. Dawkins describes DNA moving in mysterious ways. It's powerful imagery, but it kind of smuggles purpose back in at the micro level.
So this whole chapter is about setting up that core tension, the dominant machine view versus these persistent questions and alternative ways of seeing life.
Yeah, it shows the machine metaphor, while powerful, has never been the only way people have thought about nature, especially living nature, and it faces some fundamental challenges.
Okay, so that's a tour through the prologue and chapter 1 of the Science Delusion, our first step in this Tybootha podcast deep dive. We've seen the rise of science, its power, and this deep-seated debate about mechanism versus, well, something else.
We've looked at Descartes, Darwin, vitalism, even selfish genes, all grappling with this core question: what is nature, really?
And this is just the start. But hopefully, it gives you, the listener, a good sense of the groundwork Sheldrake is laying. If this foundational idea, nature as a machine, is up for debate, it really makes you think, doesn't it?
Definitely.
What other scientific truths might be worth re-examining? What could that mean for biology, for medicine, maybe even how we think about our own minds? Something to ponder.
It really encourages that spirit of questioning, not taking things as absolutely fixed forever.
Couldn't agree more. Join us next time as we continue this Tybootha exploration of the science delusion. We'll be diving into chapter 2.
That's the one asking if the total amount of matter and energy is always the same. Gets into dark matter, dark energy.
Oh yeah, some mind-bending stuff there. Looking forward to it.